we finished up our last lecture by talking a little bit about how genetics interact with the environment and that in turn influences obesity. And I gave some examples of the Pima Native Americans in Arizona versus the Pima Native Americans in Mexico, and how their diet environment influences their risk for obesity and in turn type 2 diabetes. So now we're going to be moving on to regulation of appetite and food intake this way and talk a little bit about the hormones involved. So if we look at short-term regulation of food intake, we looked at this when we talked about sugar a few weeks ago. So when we consume food, there are certain factors that will stimulate our hunger and our appetite. So remember, hunger is physiologic need to eat and appetite is psychological desire to eat. And then there are other factors that cause satiety. So when we think about or see or smell or hear about food, that makes us want to eat. Now think about that toxic food environment that we constantly have media and marketing and even just, availability of food putting thoughts and sights and smells and sounds into our brains, right? Then appealing tastes as well. So a lot of these processed foods that are high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt as well, are going to cause us to appeal to those tastes and then want to eat more. Also, those processed foods are usually pretty low in fiber, low in protein. They're going to actually cause our stomachs to contract faster and cause the hormone ghrelin to release. Now, ghrelin is going to then cause us to be hungry again. So as soon as our stomach empties from a highly processed food, then we start feeling hungry once again. We also, if there are low levels of nutrients in the intestines, which again is going to happen with processed food, that's going to make us hungrier as well. Whereas if we're eating whole foods that are high in fiber, high in water content, high in protein, that's going to cause more food to be sitting in our small intestines and leave us fuller for longer. Then, low levels of circulating nutrients are going to cause hunger and appetite to increase as well. And again, this highly toxic, highly processed food environment that causes us to eat quick, easy, fast foods are going to cause us to have a quick insulin response and then a quick uptake of all that energy into our cells, resulting in increased hunger a little bit sooner. So if we do take our time and eat meals a little bit more slowly, make them from scratch, eat things that are more nutrient dense, we can actually cause ourselves to feel fuller. But we're in this environment that just, really promotes eating quick, eating easy, eating cheap, and not taking our time with that because we want to be productive at work. So as we can see, our toxic environment is causing us to be hungrier and have more of an appetite. Stress also is going to cause us to have an influence on our appetite short term. Now, in class, somebody mentioned that they don't feel hungry when they're stressed out. So the corticotropin releasing hormone suppresses appetite, and a lot of people will feel not hungry if they're really stressed out about a test or maybe big catastrophe happens at home or something like that. And then epinephrine helps trigger the body's fight or flight response, a revved up physiologic state that temporarily puts eating on hold. So in short term, this fight or flight reaction is going to cause us to not feel hungry. All right, so when people say they're stressed and they don't feel hungry, this is what's going on here. However, chronic stress actually increases appetite. So cortisol, which we talked about a little bit earlier in class, increases appetite and can also ramp up motivation in general, including that motivation to eat. So once a stressful episode is over, cortisol levels should fall. However, because we're in this toxic work culture, toxic food environment, and toxic self-image environment, that stress doesn't go away, right? We're constantly exposed to this stress. Or if a person's stress response gets stuck in the on position, cortisol can stay elevated. And hence we have our, more realistic thing that typically happens to people, that, stress doesn't burn calories, stress causes us to eat more. And both of those things are true. The stress hormones are going to cause our energy needs to go up, they cause us to burn more energy, and then that corticotropin releasing hormone and the epinephrine cause us to not feel hungry. But then that cortisol ramps up motivation and stays elevated for long periods of time, and that's actually going to increase appetite, increase food intake, and increase circulating blood glucose and insulin levels, which could contribute to type 2 diabetes. So under stress, right, we have our body excreting the corticotropin releasing hormone and adrenaline. That's going to stimulate cortisol to be released. That's going to stimulate glucose to be released into the blood, which then stimulates that hormone insulin to be released from the pancreas, which then is going to stimulate deposition in the cells. And if we're not moving, that's going to cause fat storage and weight gain. Now, if this stress is coming from, being chased by a wild animal, or come from, running a marathon or something like that, that glucose will be used for energy. However, most of our stress comes from sedentary sources of stress, like work stress. And then, we're not moving, so that insulin is going to go to the weight gain and fat storage area. So when we're in physical or emotional distress, it's been shown to increase the intake of food that's high in fat, high in sugar, or both, right? And then the fat and sugar-filled foods also have this feedback effect that inhibits activity in parts of the brain that produce and process stress and related emotions. So we feel good, right? That's that dopamine effect we talked about earlier in the semester. So you feel good when you eat fat and sugar. So therefore we have, even these little e-cards, right? Sometimes I eat my feelings. This is just a normal thing that people talk about as if it happens all the time, right? Don't judge me by my grocery cart. You have no idea the kind of emotions I'm trying to eat away. So as we look at this, it's pretty typical in our culture to talk about eating under stress, and it's a pretty natural response in the body, and unwinding that is going to require something bigger than just self-control. It's going to require a change in the environment as well. Stress also causes people to sleep less, exercise less, drink more alcohol as well, and all of these also contribute to excess weight. So sleeping less is going to really mess with our appetites. Exercising less is going to cause us to move less, so our EER goes down. And then alcohol is full of empty calories, 7 calories per gram, which are really easily deposited in the fat stores, as opposed to glucose and protein and fat, which can be used a little bit easier as energy. So there are some ways that we can think about reducing stress that's linked to appetite enhancement. So one, lots of studies, in the UMass Medical School is actually the leader of these different studies in terms of mindfulness meditation. John Kabat-Zinn leads a Center for Mindfulness at UMass Medical that's like really bringing meditation to the general population. And countless studies conducted through that medical center, as well as other areas, show that meditation reduces stress, although much of the research is focused on high blood pressure and heart disease. Meditation can also help people become more mindful of food choices. So I actually put a little YouTube link over here that shows an example of mindful eating. So mindful eating is a method of consuming food where you are totally in the present. We tend to be really distracted when we're consuming food. In our culture, we might be typing on a computer, we might be, even having a conversation with someone or being on the phone or driving, right? And mindful eating causes a person to slow down, really take stock and taste the foods they're eating, so satiety signals can be better controlled versus just that, oh shoot, I ate too much 20 or 30 minutes later. You can also reduce stress linked to appetite enhancement through exercise at an intensity and duration appropriate for your style. So some um, some people, when they think about exercise, think about such intense exercise that they actually end up stressing their bodies more. If you have a 40-hour-a-week job and are going to school, full time, then you cannot train like a professional football player. However, just moving around each day, 3 to 5 times a week doing some aerobic exercise, 2 to 3 times a week making sure you get in some flexibility and strength, and cutting down on screen time can all be some real strategies to help you be a little bit more physically active within the lifestyle that's appropriate for you and your specific life stage. You also want to slow down. So this is a wellness wheel here, just reminding us that, there are very different aspects of wellness. We tend to focus on the financial, the intellectual, right? And look at, okay, am I doing enough? Am I contributing to society enough? We tend to maybe ignore that social, that spiritual, that physical, that emotional, that environmental. We ignore some of these really key components to just being human, because we're so focused on our occupation, our finances, and getting ahead there. So really slowing down and taking stock of where you are in terms of balance of all these things in occupation, in emotional health, in your environment, in your social health, your intellectual health, financial health, spiritual health, and physical health. Looking at this as a balanced way to really address what are your major stressors and what maybe do you need to pay a little bit more attention to can be a great way to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to slow down? How am I going to balance these things out a little bit more? So although we're stuck in this really toxic, work culture, this toxic food environment, this toxic media environment in terms of what the ideal body image is, we can really start to look within ourselves, think about how to control appetite, think about what our own set point weight is, think about what our own genetic makeup is, what our tendencies are, and really think about how can we prevent obesity-related diseases by reducing stress, by functioning a little bit better in our toxic environment, and creating a balance that leads to wellness that will help us lead the longest, highest quality life possible. So thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to talking to you more about body weight, energy balance, and obesity next week.